Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. Today we're joined by Raphael Honigstein, writer for The Athletic and Der Spiegel, who's also appeared on BT. Honigstein is a German football expert who has authored books such as Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, Das Reboot, How German Football Reinvented Itself to Conquer the World, and Klopp, Bring the Noise. It's nice to have you on today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we wanted to ask you a few questions. Obviously, you've been around United recently. You've done some work with United with Ralph Rangnick when he was there at United as well, and wanted to get your impressions as you've been very familiar with the club from the Jadon Sancho saga, from Eric Ten Hag knowing his time in Germany and everything else. So yeah, what do you think? I guess the first question we'd have is, in a general sense regarding Eric Ten Hag, what do you think his influence will be and how he will affect United in the preseason?
Well, I think we already have seen in the transfer window this year that his impact is huge. I think it comes down to United betting everything on Red, Eric the Red, for his ideas to bear fruition, and they're trying to fulfill his every wish and give him exactly what he wants. I think that's hugely encouraging if you're Eric Ten Hag. I think it's hugely exciting if you're a United fan. The one caveat is, of course, if you let the manager define your transfer strategy, you better make damn certain that it's successful. Because if, God forbid, you have to change manager again within a year's time, or let's even a couple of years, you end up with a squad that is built by a manager and somebody else coming in who might have a completely different idea. So I think for United, this is quite a departure. I think in the post Ferguson years, they've had a strategy of almost a 50-50. We let
Yeah,
we let the manager pick one or two players, but we also have our own targets, players that we believe in, players that the scouting department really believe in, who we think will help and improve any team and will play under any manager. Um, it's been a mishmash. It's
yep,
been
yep.
sometimes not quite as successful as in other times. Now United have gone down a different avenue. They've said basically, Eric Ten Hag, we will build this team for you, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how where this is going.
So obviously, I completely agree with everything you've just said. Then I assume you caught at least glimpses of the match against Liverpool, the pre-season match. What did you think already that United was showing? Because obviously it'd only been one match. He'd only been taking charge of training for 2 weeks. And do you think that you could already see a bit of the Ten Hag system in place and how those players would mesh into that? Or do you think he's still like a good few players off and it's going to be a lot more growing pains until you get the good success out of it?
Yeah, I think we saw some glimpses. I think you might be tempted to read a lot into it in terms of his playing style and formation. I think what was more perhaps telling was the individual sharpness from some players. I thought Rashford looked good, for example. Sancho looked good. I think that was an area where, aside from all the collective issues, the individual forms of players had really suffered as well and didn't really recover throughout the season. So if you get players back to playing at their top level, at their close to their potential, then again that will give a much better outcome and a much better overall performance. So I think that was encouraging. The opposition, I think, was not really um, serious enough, I think, in the way that they approached the game to read too much into it. But yeah, I think United fans have had a hard time of late, and they're entitled to feel a bit of optimism. And this game certainly hasn't hurt.
Yeah, definitely. I hope tomorrow's game also continues it as a United fan as a whole. Uh, so obviously you were saying that it has been a bit up and down the past few years, especially. Do you think from what you know of Ten Hag in Ajax, and obviously when he was as the coach of the youth team at Bayern Munich and everything, do you think the whole culture and the influence, like how he deals with the dressing room, is going to change a lot from like the last few years at United, or do you think like should we be expecting like some big changes? And do you think some players might benefit from it, or do you think some players might regress due to it, or something like that?
Well, I think we can expect, first of all, players in the team to benefit from having a proper preseason under a new manager who has a bit of time and has a bit of leeway when it comes to shaping the squad, to getting his ideas in place. I think we haven't really had that to a big extent. You know, Ole was a caretaker manager who then ended up permanent manager, but he never, I think, really had the time and the amount of space, if you will, in terms of influence to shape the team according to his wishes. And the same was true to one extent or another with the managers before. I think United, now having really gone all the way in as far as backing Ten Hag is concerned, um, have given him that bit of extra, freedom, that bit of extra influence that perhaps was missing in the past. So I think that bodes well. I think there is also a case to be made that this is going to be a huge test for him, because coaching the Bayern Munich second team and then coaching Ajax, I think can't really quite compare with the task at Man United. We saw last season, but in previous seasons as well, the amount of pressure that comes with playing these games, where on the one hand, I think fans are reasonably realistic about the team's chances and understand that there's some ground to be made up until they can compete with the likes of Liverpool and Man City domestically. But at the same time, it is always United, it is always a must win, and every bad result, every defeat, every draw was treated as an insult to the shirt and as a disaster. And I think that dynamic is not going to change under Ten Hag. So he'll have to progress and develop the team, while at the same time fulfill the expectations of a United fanhood and collective supportership who still think in United of the terms of the 90s and noughties, as a team that must win everything, or should win at least a lot. And I think that will pose some challenges. At Bayern, when there was talk of him maybe taking over the first team, there were some concerns that perhaps he hadn't quite done enough to command the authority in a dressing room full of World Cup winners and big international stars, that the jump up would be too big, even after a season or two at Ajax. Now, of course, further down the line, he'll be more experienced. He would have grown in stature. But I think that still is a big question mark, if you will. How can you handle those big egos? How can you handle a dressing room? How can you handle also the external stars that always have an opinion at United? You know, I think that's quite a unique situation again. That whatever happens, you cannot work in isolation. When you coach Chelsea, there's pressure from the ownership. When you coach Arsenal, there's pressure from the fans, but you don't have this running commentary by the biggest pundits in the game, basically passing judgment on you as a coach after every game. And again, that is something that Ten Hag won't be quite used to, although Ajax was, I guess, comparable. But still, United echoes in a much bigger international way than Ajax would have done. So it'd be really interesting, I think, to see how he negotiates that. And I think that we will only find out once the first problems arise, and there are always problems to deal with as a manager. And I think that's when things will get very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's a good point on obviously Ten Hag's difference in experience. Another manager, obviously, in the Premier League with German influence, a German himself, and in Jurgen Klopp, who's now seen a lot of success recently and in recent times. He obviously managed some bigger clubs on an international stage and European stage, than Eric Ten Hag has at this point. But in terms of that German style of football, that German influence on the actual game itself, the tactics, the strategies, how do you think Ten Hag will fare there in comparison to someone like Jurgen Klopp? And obviously he's his own man, but in terms of where they come from and the influences they have.
Well, there are some similarities when it comes to behavior out of possession. Like the Dutch school and the modern German school, there's a lot of emphasis on winning the ball back, high up the pitch if possible, further down the pitch if possible, but certainly as quickly as possible to give yourself a good chance to disrupt the opposition, to dominate, to have the ball. And then when it comes to what you do with the ball and how the setup is, of course, there are differences. There are some similarities, some things are a little bit different between the German school, if you will, and what Klopp used to play, because he has changed as well, and what is more the Dutch school of more positional play and more possession. But Ten Hag is not an ideologue. Ten Hag is not a dogmatist. He, I think, like all good coaches, has picked up elements from different teams, different managers that he likes, and has worked on his own blend of football. We saw at Ajax last season in Champions League when it works, how devastatingly good they are, how exciting they are. But we also saw that sometimes they can be a little bit open, or they used to be a little bit open and concede a lot of goals, and ultimately um, couldn't quite go as far as they wanted to in the last couple of years in the Champions League because of that. And that's going to be an interesting circle to square, if you will, because United have a lot of players, I think, who, by their instinct, want to go forward, want to attack, want to be quite direct. What they have lacked is that balance when it comes to playing without the ball, where they've been a little bit too soft and too easy to play against. And I think that's going to be one of the key things that Ten Hag will need to address. Matching the energy and the excitement for attacking with that defensive solidity that's been missing. It can come through good pressing. It can come from just being stronger physically. It can come from numbers, having more players in midfield. But he'll have to find a way, I think, to address that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's a good kind of transition into the next question for another person at United who maybe took a little bit of time in the transition to England, which is Jadon Sancho. Obviously, in 2020, we had this long story of a potential transfer that never transpired, which finally was completed last summer. But at the same time, he experienced, we would say, a bit of difficulty in adapting to the league at first under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. And one of the definite positives of Ralph Rangnick's time as manager at United was he definitely came forward a bit more and started to find his footing. And would you expect that someone like Jadon Sancho would see a large benefit from a style of manager like Eric Ten Hag that might be a little more similar to what he's been used to and where he thrived as a younger player?
Well, I think there are many factors here at play. I think, first of all, Sancho, like every other player, thrives in an environment where the players around him are playing well, when he has lots of options, when he picks up the ball and there's lots of movements. All these things were missing for United for various reasons. I think he thrives when he has a strong fullback behind him that he can combine with. I think there is a bit of a fallacy or a bit of a oversimplification in the perception that people think, well, he's much better on the left, he's not as good on the right. When we did a big piece in the Athletic before he moved, we actually looked at his output, and it was equally as good on the left as it was on the right. The bigger difference really was the quality of players around him. So in one season, he had Ashraf Hakimi behind him. Unsurprisingly, he was very productive playing on the right. In other seasons, he was on the left with a very strong left back. He was very productive on the left. So it is far more nuanced than saying he must play on one side rather than the other. Also, I think what we need from him, or what we see where we see the best coming out of him, is when he can take lots of touches. I don't think he is necessarily a direct player. Yes, he likes to play in transition, but he likes to play in small spaces as well. He likes to play quite a few touches. He can almost play as a hybrid between a number 10 and a wide player. I think if you stick him out too wide, then he doesn't have that much space to go to, and then you almost restrict his movement. So all these things, I think, combine to give him the platform where he can shine. And I think what's really important is that he's not isolated. Many times in the last few months, we saw him pick up the ball and there weren't really that many options in front of him or next to him. I think if everyone's playing closer together, and this is something that Ten Hag teams always do, attack together, lots of players around the ball, lots of options, then every player looks better, every player has more confidence, and every player will feel happier. And I think that is one of the conditions I think that have to be met if the real true genius of Jadon Sancho is to emerge next season.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And, we only got a small glimpse, obviously, in the first preseason game, but you can see some influences there. It's just preseason, but it's nice to look at styles and things like that. And certainly, Eric Ten Hag was already showing a bit more of like you mentioned, players playing closer together. Jadon Sancho was able to not pick the ball up off the touchline, stuck out wide by himself, but in a more free role alongside 4 or 5 other players in attacking positions rather than just on the break with 1 or 2, which is what would happen very often last season. And the goal he scored was even just picking it up off a rebound in the box with all the noise and the players moving around. So I'm very hopeful, and that's obviously almost, not to say like a new signing if Eric Ten Hag can get him going compared to last season, but it's a massive improvement on the squad that's there and the potential that they have if he can do so. So I think that's certainly one of the things we're all very excited about. Maybe the player I would expect to benefit the most compared to last season from Eric Ten Hag's influence, and looking forward to that.
Yeah, so we're just moving it a bit now to thinking about transfers, and obviously we're in the summer window. United have started to slowly getting linked to more forwards with the whole Cristiano Ronaldo saga right now. I know it's looking more likely he might stay because a lot of the clubs he's being linked to are categorically denying they're in for him. I know 2 names specifically who play in the Bundesliga who have been linked to as Brian Brobby and Sasa Kaladzic. Have you heard anything in regards to those 2 players? Do you think, is there any chance United could go for them? Because obviously I know they offer a bit of a different thing than if Ronaldo went. Obviously the only other forward at United's Anthony Martial and maybe Marcus Rashford as a 9. Do you think there's any chance of that happening, or do you think it could just be paper talk, and do you think they just work?
Well, I think Kalajdzic isn't quite Man United material just yet. He is in his mid-20s, but is still growing as a player. Not physically because he's quite tall, but developing as a centre forward. Bayern and Dortmund both looked at him and thought, not quite what we need. I find it very hard to imagine that United would think he is the solution for us up front. I don't think he's quite there yet. Brian Brobby had a difficult season at Leipzig. Good player, but also a player that is still at the beginning of his career and by far not the finished article. And again, I think it'd be quite a gutsy move, really, to say, okay, he's going to be the guy scoring for us. I mean, I can see him as a squad player. I can see him as a backup for Ronaldo or somebody else up front. But to lead the line, it's, for me, it's not realistic. It's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, good to hear, though, especially from someone like you in regards to German football and everything. A quick thing, though, as well, because obviously, again, we are still talking about summer transfers, are if United do get the 2 players who look quite close to joining right now, well, actually 3 if we're including. So there's Tyrell Malacia, that's obviously done. Christian Eriksen, which is basically done as well. And then there's been talk today of Lissandro Martinez and Frankie de Jong getting closer and closer to being done. if those four players all arrive at United, do you think that it's been a good window? Or do you think that United are still lacking in certain areas, or do you think they could have done better in some places? Because it does look decent on paper.
Yeah, it does look decent on paper. I don't have any issues with any of those players. The question mark for me is more, will Ten Hag's vision work? Will he be able to kind of recreate a bit of an Ajax with Ericsson, with Van der Beek, with De Jong, um, with perhaps more Dutch influence yet to come, Martinez at the back. Um, I think that is one way of doing it, but it's not necessarily, I think, a guarantee that it'll work. I think managers coming into the Premier League often feel as if they understand the league, but once it gets going, they have to readjust because things are more frenetic and things are more physical, and the referees are far more lenient than they would have imagined. And then you start making adjustments and you start changing your plans a little bit. Now, Ten Hag is obviously convinced that he can play a similar style with similar players that he had at Ajax. I'm interested to see how far that can be put into practice because we haven't really seen a team committed to possession football thrive unless they're called Manchester City. And even that took probably a good year and a bit before things got really going. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see how that's going to work. Um, you have to ask yourself this: if it wasn't for Ten Hag, would United have picked these players? I guess the answer is probably not no for almost all of them. So that just shows you how far they've diverted from their usual policy of trying to find players who, in their mind, were Man United players. But then, of course, you can say the hit rate has been relatively poor with that approach. Maybe we're better off signing players that the manager has worked with or has a strong opinion on, and that is a better way of doing it. But I still think it carries risk. And of course, the risk is that if Ten Hag finds he has to readjust because that game plan doesn't quite work, or one or two players are perhaps not as suited to the Premier League as he thinks it is, then the worst case scenario is that you have to then have another rebuild next season, where even United, with their uh, significant spending power, will find it hard to track back and to start again without losing a lot of time. And so that is the fear, that is the danger in this approach.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And, I know there's a lot of fans who are very excited about Ten Hag, but I think what you've said as well is important for everyone to keep in mind is there is some risk and there could be some time here. This is not necessarily an instant results thing. I hope that Eric Ten Hag was not hired under the premise that he could get instant results and challenge for the league next season because it feels highly unrealistic, to make this kind of transition to the league with the type of players United have and expect something like that. So I think fans and everyone involved has to be patient, and it's going to be an interesting season to see how it goes, see what adaptations he needs to make, and from there as well determine what adaptations the squad have to make. Um, I think the good news is if you get a player like Frankie de Jong in, the quality of that kind of player is so good that he should be able to fit in almost any system, should be able to. But you still may need to make some other adjustments around him in order to make that happen. And I don't, yeah, if United spend 150 million to 200 million on Ten Hag players, and it doesn't work out great, there is a lot of risk involved with that. Are they going to give him that kind of money again next summer if it's not looking so good? Probably not. if I can ask now, if we do get these players in, just as one final question, and then we'll wrap this up. In your opinion, where do you see United finishing in the next season in the league? And do you think that they have a chance in an area like Europa League, where he might be more familiar, where the Dutch style may be a little easier, there's less adjustment? Where do you think United will end up?
Well, first of all, I think the individual quality of this United team, irrespective of who's coming in or not, and whether Ronaldo's there or not, will be such that the Europa League will see them absolutely start as favourites, or as one of the favourites. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think this is going to be maybe once again the easiest way of getting into the Champions League through that avenue. It's a long, arduous, annoying slog, and believe it or not, players don't like it because it's quite mundane. Not only do you play at places, especially in the beginning, that just aren't that attractive, but also it takes away your weekend with your family. When you play Champions League rhythm, you have most of the Saturday off. You have Sundays most of the time off, and that's big family day for players. Very important day. You play Europa League. It doesn't work like that. Now you say if you're paid so and so many millions, that shouldn't be a factor, but it is. It is a factor because it does affect your work-life balance and can affect your mood at home. So players don't like it, but United don't have a choice. I think they have a good chance of winning. I think domestically, the big mission statement should be getting closer to the top. How close that is, I'm cautiously optimistic it'll be closer, but I don't know necessarily they'll translate into a real challenge. And I think top four is still going to be a very, very hard thing to crack for this United team. They might find that Arsenal and Spurs are still a little bit up and down for different reasons. And if they have the consistency that they should have, then there's a good chance of finishing in top four. But I think breaking into the Chelsea, Liverpool, and City phalanx and dominance, I think is going to be tough. I think it might take another year. But I think what's vitally important is that Ten Hag, either through some good results in the cup competitions or by getting one or two big marquee results in the league against big sides, that he shows that that progress is real. And he needs to prove that point not just to the club and to the supporters, but also to the team itself and to himself. Because you need that confidence that things are vaguely going in the right direction for everybody to stay on board. If it's a really up and down season, if you have a couple of good games, a couple of bad games, if the progress is a lot more incremental, then it's going to be harder, I think, for everybody to buy into this for the second year. So they need some big sort of statement wins, either domestically or in Europe, to show that this is really going places.
Yeah, agreed. And Jose Mourinho, when he came in, similar first season in Europa League, went through and won it against Ajax back then. And it transitioned into a pretty decent second season, even though things kind of fell apart towards the end. United did push Man City for a while there with a squad that certainly wasn't up to task, and he got a lot out of it. So you maybe see a similar pathway for Eric Ten Hag to see some results. But that's all we have for today. I want to thank you again for coming on and speaking with us and answering our questions and giving all that sort of insight. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, that's all we'll have for this video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.